Hi, everybody. Okay, today we're coming back to the Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg by Rodman Philbrick. We're on Chapter 8, Pancakes in Heaven. When we last left, Smelt had released Homer, telling him that his job was to go into the Brewster mansion to see if he can find out where the slaves that are running away on the Underground Railroad are hidden. The house on the hill gets bigger and bigger the closer I get. There are puffy white clouds reflected in the windows, and the clouds are moving against the sky, and that makes it look like the whole house is moving too. It's like I can feel the earth turning and have to be careful where to put my feet. The whole thing makes me so dizzy that the gentle green hill seems to get steeper and steeper, and finally it tips up and I'm face down in the grass. Fainted from lack of food. All that talk about biscuits and butter and honey must have reminded my stomach that it hasn't had food since I wolfed down the slops intended for Squint's hogs and started the whole terrible business of Harold getting sold to the army. Soft, soft grass. Better than a pillow. Makes me forget I'm hungry. Makes me forget everything. Next thing, I'm floating. No, not floating. I'm being carried, and there are gentle murmuring voices that sound like running water. And then I'm in a warm place and somebody's holding a cup to my lips and telling me to drink. Just a small sip, the voice says, and for a moment I think it's our dear mother. Then I wake up and see big gray eyes studying me. Big gray eyes and rosy red cheeks and a helmet of fine white hair. Turkey broth, she says. Good for what ails you. The lady with the gray eyes helps me sit up. She holds the cup while I sip the broth. Nothing ever tasted so good or made me feel so warm and safe and alive. Do you know where you are? She asks. Big house, I say. The Brewster house, she explains. I'm Mrs. Bean. Brewster Bean, my tongue says. I'm the cook hereabouts, she gently explains. And when they find a starving boy in the front yard, it's only natural that they bring him to me. Mrs. Bean takes the empty cup and says there's more where that came from when I'm ready. She folds her plump arms and looks at me kind of sideways, as if trying to see inside my head. Are you simple, dear, or is it hunger that makes you ramble? I take a deep breath and I try to clear my head. Then I tell her who I am, like Smelt suggested, and that I'm looking for my brother, and that my horse got stolen, and I leave out where I come from exactly, so nobody can send for Squint and Leech. Now, Homer just told us that he explained the story in a straightforward manner and told her simply what happened, leaving out just a few key details. This is something he'll often do in the book. We'll find out from other characters and their reactions to his story some of the details that he must have actually really told. There's the mostly in the Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg. It seems like Mrs. Bean believes most of it. As soon as he says that, we know that she doesn't believe it. Seems like Mrs. Bean believes most of it because she starts nodding and saying, oh dear, and I decide it's time to shed a tear. Or two for my lost brother to really make her believe me. And the next thing I know, she's hugging me and patting my head and promising that Mr. Brewster will find Harold. When Jebediah Brewster sets his mind to a thing, watch out, she declares, dusting at her white apron. Mr. Brewster will be back later, and you'll tell him what you told me. Orphan boy searching for his brother. That will get his attention. Meantime, Mrs. Bean makes it her mission to fill my belly. She asks would I rather have a plate of meat and gravy or pancakes and bacon, and I go for the pancakes. While the bacon is sizzling in the big iron fry pan, the kind our dear mother calls a spider, I sit next to the stove and watch, because Mrs. Bean, she is something to see. The way her plump hands fly around the room like pale white birds, bringing things out of cupboards and jars and larder boxes. "Can't help notice you like shoes," she says, stirring flour into a blue mixing bowl. "Did you lose them along the way?" Figure there's been enough truth for one day, so I say, "Yes, ma'am, lovely pair of boots, made from the skin of a timber rattler." "A rattlesnake? Oh my." "Yes, ma'am. Snake had me cornered when Harold wrestled it to death. Snake tried to spit in his eyes and blind him, but Harold was too quick. Broke its neck with one flick of his wrist." "Amazing," she says. "A snake with a neck. Must have been 30 foot long." Mrs. Bean nods. Little puff of flour comes up from the bowl. "And then your brother skinned the snake and made you boots. Is that what you're telling me?" I thought about that, and I decided modification was in order. "Not exactly. Fact is, Harold did skin the beast, but I made the boots myself. Had a matching belt, too. They took everything." "The thieves who stole your horse? What did you call that horse now? King something or other?" "Prince Bob. Bob's a thoroughbred racehorse. 3 years old and faster than a bee sting." "Remarkable," says Mrs. Bean. And where was it you said you came from?" "Oh, up in the north," I say vaguely. "Little no-account place." "Well, yes, but it must have a name, mustn't it? Every place has a name, no matter how small." "Smelt," I tell her, in a moment of inspiration. "Excuse me?" Now, the moment she says, "excuse me," that's a giant red flag to me, giant warning flashing red lights that she might have heard of him. "Smelt," I tell her in a moment of inspiration. "Excuse me?" "Smelt, that's what they call it, on account of the swamp nearby." I'm congratulating myself for not calling it stink. Stink would be too much to believe, but smelt is subtle. Smelt rarefied. Never heard of smelt," Mrs. Bean allows, fixing her calm gray eyes on me. "Thought I knew every village in the state of Maine, at least by name, but I've never heard of smelt." I almost say that Smelt has never heard of her either, but think better of it. Nothing like the prospect of pancakes to make me smart-mouthed and sassy. Mouth shut, I take the time to survey Mrs. Bean's magnificent kitchen. The room's bigger than Squint's whole house, with a fry stove and a bake stove and a full fireplace with a Dutch oven. Pantry has more canned goods than the general store in Pine Swamp. And there are 3 different slate sinks, one for washing dishes and one for rinsing vegetables, and one just for the heck of it, I guess. Loads of cupboards with glass fronts, copper pots of every size, rock maple countertops, a butter urn that Mrs. Bean says belongs in a museum. And drawers? There are big drawers and little drawers and bread drawers and knife drawers and linen drawers and drawers for extra things left over. Mrs. Bean suggests I stop opening and closing the drawers and sit down to pancakes and bacon. She pulls out a chair and scoots me up to the kitchen table. There on a big white china plate is a pile of pancakes I only ever dreamed about, 'cause Squint never gave us more than stale bread and sour molasses. Pancakes slathered in yellow butter. Steaming pancakes drowned in warm maple syrup. Figure Smelt must have killed me for sure, and I've woken up in heaven. Or maybe I'm still so hungry I can't think straight. Well, then I decide, as good as the pancakes taste, this can't be heaven, because there aren't any clouds or golden harps or angels with whispery wings. And God would be there too, wouldn't he, if this was really heaven? That's when he comes in from the parlor, dressed all in black. God himself. Chapter 9 is called Quaker Talk. The man who looks like God himself is Jebediah Brewster, owner of the house. He's got a long, flowing white beard, piercing blue eyes, and a booming voice that rattles the china when he bellows, "Hello!" A voice that freezes my brain and makes it hard to answer simple questions like, "What be thy name, son?" and "Where be thy home?" Quaker Talk. The young scallywag calls himself Homer and says he's from a place called Smelt, says Mrs. Bean, weighing in. The only truthful part of him is the part that's hungry. Smelt, hey? Very interesting. I think that confirms it for us. These two have heard of Smelt, or at least know Smelt. We can infer pretty strongly. And by the way, we also have confirmation that Mrs. Bean did not believe much of what Homer told her the first time. Smelt, eh? Very interesting, Mr. Brewster responds in his kindly way. Well, all God's creatures are from somewhere. The precise location matters not. Thee be welcome in this house, Homer, whoever thee be, and whatever has brought thee here. Mr. Brewster sits down at the table, adjusts his black sleeves, and announces that he will have a glass of cold water if Mrs. Bean will be so kind as to oblige. He thanks her, takes the glass in both hands, and drinks it in 3 long gulps. His big throat moves under his beard, and you can hear the water going down like it was leaking out of an old hand pump. The finest spring water, he announces, dabbing delicately at his beard with his linen napkin. That's what drew me to this particular location. Clear, cold spring water, steeped in the best minerals. Keeps the guts healthy and purifies the blood. I intended to bottle it as an elixir and sell it by the drop. But in digging out the spring, we encountered gemstones, and that became my business. Just one of the Lord's many surprises. Mr. Brewster then folds his long-fingered hands like he's praying and studies me for a while, as if he's looking at my soul, if I got one, and he finds it wanting. That means missing something, wanting something else to be complete. It makes me fit to fidget being studied like that, but I manage to hold still, because both of them are waiting for me to tell a lie. I can sense that much. Does thee know much about gemstones, Homer? Mr. Brewster asks, sweet as can be. Well, something in me wants to say that my third cousin, Curtis McTavish, has been trading gems for his whole life and recently come into possession of the world's largest ruby that he got off the widow of Blackbeard the pirate, but that the ruby is cursed. And ever since he got the ruby, poor McTavish lives in fear. He's barricaded himself inside his own dungeon and believes that the ruby speaks to him in the ghostly voices of all it has cursed. Of course, I don't have a cousin named Curtis McTavish, or any cousin that I'm aware of, and I clamp my jaw shut until the urge passes. He's gone quiet, Mrs. Bean observed suspiciously. Maybe it was starving that made him talk so. Mr. Brewster takes a deep breath and nods to himself as if satisfied. Homer Figg, he announces. Thee may be an innocent stranger, or thee may be a spy sent by those who oppose us. But one thing is clear to me. God has a hand in this, and he would not have us turn away a hungry child. Mrs. Bean smiles at me and shrugs. I get the idea that nothing Mr. Brewster does surprises her. "Come along, son," he says, standing up, "and thee will be shown the secret of Brewster Mines." The boy needs a bath," Mrs. Bean points out. "I doubt he's had a bath this year, and maybe last year, too." "After he surveys the mine," says Mr. Brewster, clamping his hand on my shoulder. "After he has seen our amazing mine, thee can scrub him until he bleeds." I'm hoping that's just more Quaker talk, but Mrs. Bean has a soapy kind of gleam in her eye. Before I have time to make plans for escape, Mr. Brewster's marching me out the door and into the long grass. We're going uphill, away from the big house, away from the warm kitchen, and the sky so thin and cool and blue makes me feel a little out of breath somehow. Pretty soon we come to a path, worn into ruts by wagon wheels. It's the second time that detail's been there. And then to a set of rusty iron rails hammered into the hillsides. We follow the rails. From around the bend comes the gentle murmur of flowing water, but sound must be tricky in these hills because I never do see the water. All the while, Mr. Brewster's big voice never stops booming, and it comes to me that he couldn't keep a secret even if it killed him, because secrets are related to lies, and I doubt that Mr. Brewster ever lied in his whole life. Which reminds me of my brother Harold, who's probably halfway to the war by now. And worrying about that makes it hard to concentrate on all the things Mr. Brewster's saying about gemstones and mines and why God has put us on earth and how he tests us. Maybe Homer should have listened to that part. So I searched for healing water, and I instead found the rainbow, he's saying. Not a pot of gold exactly, but a vast deposit of tourmaline, which comes in all the colors of the rainbow. Tourmaline. Sounds like a pirate name to me. Must be I got pirates on the brain for some reason. But Mr. Brewster explains that tourmaline is a gemstone used in costume jewelry. When polished, it shines like diamonds or rubies or emeralds, depending on how it's cut. "Tourmaline brought me great wealth," he says. "It did not bring me wisdom or show me the path. It was God who provided wisdom, and Frederick Douglass who showed me the path." We've talked about how Frederick Douglass was a famous abolitionist that encouraged the ending of slavery, which tells us a lot about Mr. Brewster. Of course, we already figured out that he was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Before he can explain, we come upon the mine itself. I've been expecting a proper tunnel cut into the side of a mountain like I've seen in storybooks. But Mr. Brewster's mine is more like a big pit in the ground. We're looking down on some rusty tin roofs and a bunch of rickety-looking shacks where the miners work, prying hunks of rock from the ground and cutting out the raw gemstone. Except there are no miners working. There's no one at all. Mr. Brewster guides me down a narrow little pathway into the empty pit. "This is the secret of Brewster Mines," he announces quite happily. "We ceased production 2 years ago, when the war started." "But why is that a secret?" I ask. "Because the mind remains active," he says mysteriously. "It is convenient if the world assumes that the activity is related to mining. Folks think we provide lead and copper to the Union Army. That is not true, and I pray for forgiveness for letting it stand without correction, because my untruthfulness is in the service of a greater good. For once in my life, I keep my mouth shut and I wait for him to tell me whatever it is he wants to say. I assume he's going to confess there are fugitive slaves hid in the mine somewhere, like Smelt said. But I'm not supposed to know that, so I gotta be ready to act surprised when it comes out. Only it don't come out. Not exactly." Mr. Brewster drapes his long arm over my shoulders and holds on, like he expects me to bolt any second. He lowers his big voice to a ragged whisper. "Ebenezer Smelt is well known in these parts. he confides. Mr. Smelt is often found in the company of William Mullins, better known as Stink. I mention this because thee told Mrs. Bean thee hailed from a place called Smelt. To my knowledge, no such place exists. So I must assume thee are in league with the murderous Mr. Smelt and his evil associate. I started out keeping my mouth shut on purpose, but Jebediah Brewster has knocked the words right out of me.